12 U.S. states most likely to collapse. First, when the economic crisis hits. Some crises don't erupt with a bang. They bleed quietly through every cracked bridge, every shuttered hospital, every town running out of funds. These 12 states are no longer standing on solid ground. They're sinking deeper into the mud of poverty, dependency, and dead industries. One major recession, or even just a slight economic slip, could be enough to bring the entire system in these places crashing down like dominoes. If you think your state is safe, maybe you haven't noticed the cracks spreading across the map of America, inch by inch, state by state. West Virginia, when the canary in the coal mine stops singing. You know what makes a sound right before everything collapses? A little bird in the coal mine. And in West Virginia, that bird stopped singing a long time ago. West Virginia was once a symbol of industrial America. Coal wasn't just an industry, it was identity. It was survival for an entire generation. But when coal fell, West Virginia lost half of its economic heart. And what happens when the heart stops beating with nothing to replace it? The answer is becoming clearer, day by day. For over a decade, the state has been stuck in a loop of recession. Its unemployment rate ranks among the highest in the country. Poverty-related diseases, from obesity to opioid addiction, spread like wildfire. Medical facilities are scarce, schools are crumbling, and nearly 1/3 of the state budget depends on federal aid. If America enters a deep recession tomorrow, West Virginia could be the first to fall. Just listen to Joe, a 62-year-old former miner now living off food stamps and Medicaid. We don't ask for much, just want to see our kids have jobs that don't involve coal, a hospital to go to when we're sick, a school that doesn't leak when it rains. But for years, nothing's changed. West Virginia isn't dying from one fatal blow. It's dying slowly, in silence. And the scariest part? We're letting it happen, without saying a word. And you, if your hometown started slipping like West Virginia, would you leave or stay and fight for it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Mississippi, where the American dream fades in the dark. Here, people don't dream of becoming millionaires. They just hope the nearest hospital doesn't shut down this month. Mississippi doesn't need a crisis to fall into crisis. It's been living in one for a long time. This is the state with the lowest median income in the nation. 1 in 4 residents, including children, lives below the poverty line. The roads are split with cracks like scars that never heal. Tap water is polluted. Schools are outdated and understaffed. And hospitals? They're closing one by one, especially in rural areas, where even a burst appendix can turn into a death sentence. Jobs are scarce, opportunities even more so, and those who can afford to, especially educated young people, are leaving the state faster than ever. They're not looking back. A real brain drain is happening here every single day. A former nurse from Jackson said, "I used to care for an entire neighborhood. Then my hospital shut down. I moved to Atlanta. Who's left? Just the sick, and a string of apologies." Mississippi is the clearest example of a two-speed America. One side grows, innovates, builds tech. The other stagnates, decays, and gets left behind. You may have never been to Mississippi, but if America crashes again, the first cracks will likely start right here. Illinois, a wealthy state, going bankrupt from within. When you think of Illinois, you picture Chicago. A vibrant city, economic powerhouse, skyscrapers lining Lake Michigan. But behind those bright lights lies a truth few dare to say out loud. Illinois is drowning in a quiet, long-running financial crisis. The state holds the largest public pension debt in the country, over $211 billion, a massive number like a ticking time bomb. To keep the system afloat, the government keeps raising taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, income taxes, and when people feel they're paying too much for too little, they leave. Illinois is bleeding residents, Hundreds of thousands have left in recent years, taking with them their income, talent, and hope. Public services are crumbling. Schools lack teachers, police departments lack funding, and potholes stretch from block to block. If a recession hits, Illinois could become the textbook case, not because it lacks resources or potential, but because of poor leadership, outdated systems, and a refusal to change for decades. Illinois isn't poor, but poverty is creeping into communities because of mismanagement, corruption, and a failure to break the cycle. The question now isn't just, how will this state survive the next crisis? It's, will the rest of America learn from Illinois, or let this tragedy repeat elsewhere? Nevada, a risky gamble on Vegas soil. Nevada knows how to dazzle, but behind the lights of Vegas lies a cold truth. You can't build a sustainable future on tourism and luck alone. Nevada may be where you go to strike it rich overnight, but for the state itself, the economic fate is just as fragile as a giant roll of the dice. Tourism and casinos are Nevada's lifeblood. They drive jobs, incomes, and the state budget. But that also means, when Americans start cutting back on spending, the chips stop rolling too, and state revenue nearly disappears. The state doesn't collect personal income tax, a feature once praised. But it also means, when tourism goes to sleep, there's no backup plan. The 2008 financial crisis nearly pushed Nevada over the edge, with the highest foreclosure and unemployment rates in the country. The scars of that collapse are still visible, but the real danger is, the economy hasn't fundamentally changed since then. A hotel worker in Las Vegas shared, "I love my job, but every time the economy dips, we're the first to get cut. Vegas may be lit up, but behind the bar are people terrified they're about to get laid off again." Nevada has bet its entire economy on an industry that was never built to last. And right now, there's no clear strategy to pivot. If another recession hits, the state might lose it all. Again. Michigan, the deep crack in America's steel belt. 12 U.S. states most likely to collapse. First, when the economic crisis hits Michigan, was once the beating heart of the American industrial dream, where cars rolled off the lines with sparks of hope and pride. But after waves of crisis and restructuring, the state now lives among the cracks left behind. Nearly 40% of residents are facing financial hardship, a figure not just alarming, but one that makes people ask, what happened to the state that was once a symbol of national strength? Flint, Pontiac, Detroit, once thriving hubs, have deteriorated drastically. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned, schools are closed, and the tap water isn't safe to drink. The images that once shocked America, like Flint's lead crisis, still stand as warnings today. The biggest issue, Michigan is still betting on the auto industry, but that industry is no longer a safe anchor. With the rise of electric vehicles, automation, and global competition, traditional factories are shrinking, pushing thousands of workers into uncertainty. A former engineer from Pontiac said, "I used to think I'd retire with my company's logo on my shirt. Now I just hope the bank doesn't take my house." If the auto industry keeps stumbling, Michigan could see not just instability, but a massive statewide collapse. A new crisis is looming. This time, not just about manufacturing, but about whether an entire state can survive. Louisiana, the radiant South and its hidden wounds. Louisiana was once the gem of the South, with vibrant culture, lively jazz, and dreamy nights along the French Quarter. But beneath the charm lies a brutal truth. This is one of the poorest, most fragile states in America. Nearly 18% of the population lives below the poverty line. Infrastructure, from levees to roads, is crumbling. Public schools are weak. Hospitals are understaffed and under-equipped. Worse still, Louisiana faces not only man-made crises, but the wrath of nature. Floods, hurricanes, and climate change hit the state with increasing intensity. The oil and gas industry, once the backbone of the economy, is now as unstable as global oil prices. Jobs are shaky. Wages don't cover the basics. And the most dangerous trend, young people are leaving, abandoning a state that no longer has the energy to rebuild. Marie, a high school teacher in Baton Rouge, shared, "I've watched hundreds of my best students leave Louisiana in search of a future elsewhere. What's left are empty desks and questions no one can answer." Louisiana doesn't lack spirit. It doesn't lack culture. But it does lack what keeps a community alive: opportunity, faith, and a system strong enough to survive the next blow. Oklahoma, a state clinging to oil and prayers. In Oklahoma, oil prices don't just move markets, they decide fates. When they fall, the whole state falls with them. Oklahoma is a living example of what happens when a state bets everything on one industry. And that industry starts to wobble. Heavily dependent on oil and gas, Oklahoma has seen prosperous years, but the cost is fragility. When oil prices drop hard, the state's budget plunges into crisis immediately. And that's already happened, more than once. The result? Waves of cuts to education, healthcare, and infrastructure, weakening an already vulnerable state. Public schools lack funding. Many teachers take second jobs just to survive. Dropout rates are high, and most talented young people are leaving. Public health is also in a red alert zone. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease. Oklahoma ranks near the top for chronic illness. Rural healthcare is collapsing, with hospitals on the brink of shutting down or barely functioning with outdated equipment. A doctor at a rural hospital in the western part of the state sighed, "We pray for oil prices to bounce back because if they don't, this hospital won't be able to afford heat in the winter." In Oklahoma, oil is the economy, and hope is a prayer. But in a world shifting to renewable energy, that hope may no longer be enough to keep the state on its feet. Kentucky, where the future is frozen by hardship from the inside out. Kentucky isn't loud. It doesn't make headlines every day with scandals or sensational news. But that quiet hides a disturbing reality: an economy silently eroding, a community left behind, and a future slipping further out of reach. Nearly 22% of Kentucky residents live below the poverty line. Not just a statistic, but real families struggling with rent, medication, and a fading belief in tomorrow. Tens of thousands of young people are leaving the state because staying means low-wage jobs, crumbling infrastructure, and fading opportunities. Schools are underfunded. Roads are breaking apart. Rural hospitals are shutting down. A teacher in eastern Kentucky put it simply, "We teach on faith, faith that the lights will still be on next month." But Kentucky isn't just battling poverty, it's sinking in a deep opioid crisis. Small communities once built on hard work and togetherness are now being choked by addiction and death. In some counties, overdose deaths have surpassed traffic fatalities. Young people die, adults lose hope, families fall apart. And the mental health care system? It barely exists. Worse still, most of Kentucky's essential services, from schools and healthcare to welfare, run on federal funding. That means if the national economy falters, if Washington has to tighten spending, Kentucky will be one of the first to feel the blow, and one of the hardest hit. Decades of fragile recovery and flickers of hope could vanish overnight. Kentucky isn't short on resilient people. It isn't short on good communities. But courage can't substitute for opportunity. And with the economy dangling on a thin thread, what Kentucky really needs is action, investment, a national presence in places America seems to have forgotten. Alaska, the state on a drying oil pipeline. Alaska, the last frontier, where wild beauty meets the northern skies, But beneath the splendor lies a harsh truth every economist dreads. Alaska is standing on a broken leg, and that leg is oil. It may sound unbelievable, a U.S. state in the 21st century relying on oil and gas for 85% of its budget. But that's the reality. Every time oil prices spike, Alaska breathes easy. Every time they crash, the state sounds the alarm. And in recent years, the alarms have been constant. From 2015 to 2017, when global oil prices plummeted, Alaska didn't just tighten its belt. It withdrew billions from its permanent fund reserve, a fund meant to secure the future for the next generation. But now, instead of being a long-term escape plan, that fund is being used like an emergency ATM, just to keep schools, hospitals, police, and roads running. One state employee once said during a community meeting in Anchorage, "We don't call it a budget anymore. We call it a priority list. Who gets to stay? Who gets cut?" It's worse than that. Oil production is declining. Wells are drying up. Pipelines are underperforming. That means it's not just about volatile prices. The supply itself is shrinking, like losing your job and getting a pay cut at the same time. And federal aid? It makes up nearly 1/3 of the state's GDP. In other words, if Washington stops the checks or even just slows them down, Alaska's entire system could freeze. Rural communities, already isolated by geography and weather, would become even more desperate as healthcare, transportation, and energy are slashed. Imagine living where winters drop to -40 and not knowing if you'll have heat. That's not a hypothetical. That's the daily fear for many families in the North. New Mexico, beautiful, but losing its grip on the future. New Mexico is often described as wild, artistic, spiritual, inspiring, and that's all true. But behind that poetic image lies a truth few want to confront. This is one of the poorest states in America, with the third highest poverty rate nationwide, and household income far below the national average. The economy here runs on Washington, D.C. Nearly 1/3 of the state's budget comes from federal funding, used to keep schools open, hospitals running, and public services from collapsing. But what happens if the national economy stumbles? If that money slows down? In rural areas, unemployment is so high that locals refer to it as the long silence. Silence from idle machinery, from missing jobs, from disappearing hope. Aside from a few defense and energy research hubs, the state's economy is too narrow to withstand serious shocks. One teacher in Navajo Nation said bluntly, "We teach with chalkboards and Wi-Fi from our cell phones. We're trying to make sure the world doesn't forget this place, but it gets harder every year." The gap between more developed areas like Santa Fe or Albuquerque and impoverished rural communities, especially native lands, is growing. And for many people, New Mexico doesn't feel like part of modern America. It feels forgotten. Alabama, when a minor slip feels like a collapse. You know what makes a state vulnerable to collapse? It's not a major storm. It's not some dramatic bankruptcy. It's the silent decay, bridges left unrepaired, rural hospitals quietly closing, kids learning from textbooks decades old, and a generation that no longer sees a future in the place where they were born. That's Alabama, a proud state, rich in history, full of amazing people, but also a place where 16% of the population lives below the poverty line. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Drive through Alabama's small towns, and it's clear. This isn't just a poor state. It's a state left behind. From Montgomery to the Appalachian backroads, people live a different reality than what politicians in Washington often talk about. A reality of fragile infrastructure, thin public services, and an economy creaking like an old door about to give. You might meet someone like Cheryl, a single mom in Tuscaloosa. She works 2 part-time jobs, one at a restaurant, one at a pharmacy. She says, "I don't need much. I just need my car not to break down. I just need my tap water not to run orange. I just need my kid to learn from a real teacher, not a temp every week. These things, in the 21st century, in a country like America, should not be luxuries. And here's the deeper problem. Alabama's economy isn't diverse enough to absorb big shocks. Many areas still rely on traditional manufacturing, small-scale farming, or low-wage jobs. New industries, from tech to clean energy, have barely touched down here, not because Alabama lacks potential, but because no one's invested enough to turn that potential into reality. Add to that, Alabama relies heavily on federal funding to maintain basic services: education, healthcare, transportation, social welfare. And what happens if the federal government tightens its belt? This fragile system could collapse like dominoes. One day, it's Medicaid cuts. Next week, it's an elementary school closing. The week after, a rural hospital runs out of money. Let's talk about the future. If a nationwide recession hits, and it doesn't even have to be as bad as 2008, Alabama won't just be struggling. It could collapse, not because its people are weak, but because they've been left without defenses, with no stable foundation to stand on. This video isn't about blame, it's about truth. Places like Alabama deserve investment, attention, rebuilding, not just praise for being resilient every time a crisis hits. Arkansas. Where? When the internet cuts out, so do the opportunities. If you don't hear much about Arkansas on the evening news, that's part of the problem. Some places make headlines because of crisis. Arkansas doesn't, because everything happens too quietly, too routinely, for anyone to notice. But take a closer look. Nearly 18% of Arkansas residents live below the poverty line, and the number's even higher in many rural counties. This isn't about not affording a movie ticket. This is about families choosing between gas and medication, between keeping the house or keeping the fridge full. Most of Arkansas is rural, scattered, and disconnected, and that reality touches every part of life. High-speed internet? Still a luxury in many places. Healthcare? Entire towns have only one clinic open half the week. Education? Outdated textbooks, understaffed schools, no tech, and fewer chances. A friend who grew up in Pine Bluff shared, "People there are kind, but they're exhausted. They wake up every day and work, but still can't make it. And when you ask about the future, they just shrug. Nothing changes here." The state's economy leans heavily on low-wage sectors: agriculture, retail, and cheap manufacturing. And that's a huge issue, because these are the first industries to get hit when a recession arrives. When Americans spend less, when supply chains freeze, when companies shrink, Arkansas feels the pain faster and deeper than most. Add to that, Arkansas gets a large share of its budget from federal programs: Medicaid, nutrition aid, workforce support. If Washington pulls back, entire parts of the state risk falling into a can't live, can't survive scenario. What makes it worse? There's too little investment to help Arkansas recover. Innovation hubs, tech startups, creative industries, they're barely here. Not because Arkansans lack talent, but because the system hasn't created space for them to grow. When an economy has just a few pillars, and all of them are shaky, you don't need a major storm to fall apart, just one strong gust, and the whole thing can crumble. But like everywhere else on this list, Arkansas isn't just a problem. It's a wake-up call. America shouldn't only invest in booming metros, it must also lift up the places losing faith in themselves. 12 U.S. states. Most likely to collapse. First, when the economic crisis hits. What you've just watched isn't a death sentence. It's a warning. Some states are cracking, and if nothing changes, those cracks could spread across all of America. If you believe these stories deserve more attention, hit subscribe, share this video, and drop a comment, so together we can keep bringing truth to light. Note: This video is for informational purposes only, based on public data and social analysis. Because some crises don't explode, they quietly consume an entire state, day by day.